March snow crunched softly underfoot. Woodcutter Peter Koltsov stopped near a fallen birch tree and wiped the sweat from his forehead. 40 years of working in the taiga had taught him to sense the forest. But today, something was wrong. A rusty hulk peered out between the trunks, metal covered with moss and lichen. Peter made his way toward his discovery, pushing through the young undergrowth. What he saw made his heart beat faster. A bus, an old Soviet Liaz 677, familiar to every resident of the USSR. But what was it doing in the middle of the taiga, 70 kilometers from the nearest road? Koltsov walked around the vehicle. The wheels were sunk into the ground, up to the hubs. The windows were cloudy with age, but still intact. The route number was still visible on the side. 47. Before we begin the story, please write which city you are from. We are very interested to know where you are watching our video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. The door did not open right away. The rusty hinges squeaked, and Peter peered inside. What he saw turned an ordinary workday into a nightmare. There were people sitting in the seats. 12 people in winter clothes from the early 90s. They had all been dead for many years, but were surprisingly well preserved thanks to the northern cold. No one was lying on the floor. No one was trying to get out. They just sat in their seats as if they had fallen asleep on the road and never woke up. Their faces showed calmness, almost peace. A man of about 35 was sitting behind the wheel. Peter noticed a bulge in his jacket pocket. With trembling hands, the lumberjack pulled out a sealed plastic bag. Inside were documents and an old cassette tape. The label was written in uneven handwriting. February 15th, 1991. If you found this, we are all dead. Alexei Morozov, bus driver number 47. Koltsov backed away toward the exit. His hands were shaking as he dialed the emergency number. But he did not yet know that this discovery would turn many people's lives upside down and reveal a secret that had been hidden in the depths of the archives for 30 years. 2 hours later, an investigation team arrived at the scene. Senior prosecutor Anna Volkova climbed up the slope, cursing herself for wearing uncomfortable shoes. At 40, she had faced death many times, but she had never seen anything like this. The examination of the scene took all day. Experts carefully recorded every detail. The bus was in a natural hollow, hidden from view by overgrown trees. There were no signs of an accident or violence. It's as if they just stopped here and died, Volkov muttered, examining the interior of the bus. The medical examiner nodded, not looking up from his work. The initial findings shocked everyone. All 12 people had died at the same time, presumably from carbon monoxide poisoning. But how could such a large amount of deadly gas have entered a roadworthy bus? An engineer's ID card from the Northern Star factory was found in the pocket of one of the passengers. In the bag of a middle-aged woman, they found a dismissal certificate from the same enterprise. Gradually, a picture emerged. All the victims worked at the same factory. But the most intriguing find was the driver's cassette. Anna Volkova personally took it to the forensics center. The old Yauza tape recorder struggled to play the 30-year-old recording. At first, there was only static and engine noise. Then a man's voice came on, calm but tired. "My name is Alexei Morozov. I am the driver of bus number 47. Today is February 15th, 1991. Volkova listened intently to every word. The story Morozov told sounded like the script of a thriller, but it was the reality of the crumbling Soviet Union. I'm taking the last group of workers from the Northern Star factory to the village of Berezovka. The factory is closing. People are being laid off. But they know what they shouldn't know. And now they're hunting us. The recording was interrupted by static. Volkova fast-forwarded the tape. Morozov's voice sounded increasingly tense. Savelyev ordered us to turn off the highway. He says there's an accident ahead, but I can see he's lying. There's no accident. The investigator felt a chill run down her spine. She was close to solving a mystery that began 30 years ago. The next day, Volkova went to the archives. The case of the missing bus number 47 was kept in a dusty folder marked "Closed" due to the impossibility of establishing the circumstances of the incident. The case files were surprisingly sparse. The report of the missing bus was filed by a certain Viktor Savelyev, head of the District Motor Transport Department. According to him, the bus was supposed to return from its route on the evening of February 15th, but never did. The search continued for exactly 1 week. The official version: the bus lost its way in a heavy snowstorm and fell through the ice on one of the many lakes in the area. Volkova dug up the archives of the Hydrometeorological Service. There was no snowstorm on February 15th, 1991. The weather was clear and frosty. Visibility was excellent, so someone was deliberately hiding the truth. But who and why? The next clue was the Northern Star factory. It had indeed been closed in February 1991. Officially, this was due to the conversion of military production. But archive staff hinted to Volkova that there were other documents. The classified materials were kept in a separate safe. Special permission was required to study them. Volkova spent 2 days getting the paperwork in order, but it was worth it. The Severnaya Zvezda factory produced components for nuclear submarines. The production process generated radioactive waste, which, according to the technology, had to be sent for processing to specialized centers. But in reality, the waste was simply buried in the forest. This saved money that was supposed to be spent on disposal. The scheme worked for years and brought huge profits to the plant's management. By February 1991, the scandal was ready to break. A group of engineers and technologists gathered irrefutable evidence of violations. They planned to hand over the documents to the prosecutor's office. But someone found out about their plans and took radical measures to prevent the information from leaking out. Volkova studied the list of passengers on bus number 47. All 12 people were involved in the investigation of violations at the plant. Lead engineer Konstantin Belov, technologist Maria Osipova, accountant Semyon Krayukov, each of them knew part of the truth. Together, they posed a deadly threat to those who were profiting from environmental crimes. The investigator returned to studying Morozov's tape. In the middle of the recording, the driver's voice became increasingly alarmed. "There are 2 black cars ahead. They're blocking the road. People in plain clothes are getting out. What should I do?" Next, the voices of the passengers could be heard. They realized they were trapped. Some suggested hiding their documents, others called for help. But there was no help coming. "They're demanding that we get out of the bus," Morozov continued. "They say they're checking our documents. But I see fear in their eyes. This is not a routine check." Volkova stopped the tape. Why did the driver suddenly switch to English? She listened to the phrase several times, but there was no doubt. Morozov had indeed uttered his last words in a foreign language. Maybe it was a code? A signal for those who would find the recording? Or was it just the confusion of a man who knew he was dying? The next fragment of the recording made Volkova shudder. She could hear the hiss of gas entering the bus. The passengers' voices grew fainter and fainter. One by one, They fell asleep. "Goodbye," Morozov whispered. "If anyone finds this recording, remember, we are not to blame. We just wanted to tell the truth." The recording ended abruptly. Volkova spent a sleepless night thinking about what she had heard. By morning, she had a clear understanding of what had happened. 12 people had been killed because they knew too much. But who had given the order to kill them? And who had carried it out? The search for Viktor Savelyev took a whole day. His personal details were still in the district administration archives. In 1991, he was 45 years old. If he was still alive, he would now be 95. His registered address no longer existed. A shopping center had been built on the site of the old house. But the neighbors remembered the Savelyev family. After the collapse of the USSR, they moved to the regional center. Volkova called all the nursing homes in Arkhangelsk. She was lucky at the fourth one. Viktor Nikolaevich Savelyev really did live there. But his health did not allow for questioning. "He hardly ever gets out of bed," explained the head doctor. "He has heart problems and hardly speaks, although his memory is still quite good." Volkova insisted on a meeting. Savelyev lay in his room, staring at the ceiling with cloudy eyes. 95 years had left little of the energetic party functionary he had been in his youth. "Viktor Nikolaevich," the investigator began cautiously, "I want to talk to you about bus number 47. The old man's reaction exceeded all expectations. He turned his head sharply, his eyes wide with horror. His lips trembled, but no sound came out. Then Savelyev grabbed his chest and began to choke. The doctors worked on him for half an hour. The heart attack was almost fatal. When Savelyev came to, he was unable to speak coherently. But Volkova understood the main thing. The mention of bus number 47 had caused the old man to panic. So he really did know what had happened 30 years ago. The investigators spent the next few days studying Savelyev's biography. His character references and work reports were preserved in the party archives. His career was typical for a Soviet functionary, from Komsomol organizer to head of the district motor transport enterprise. But in February 1991, something changed. Savelyev suddenly submitted his resignation at his own request. The official reason was family circumstances. In reality, he was fleeing. A month after the disappearance of bus number 47, Savelyev sold his house and moved to Arkhangelsk. He worked in minor positions and avoided publicity. It was as if he was trying to become invisible. Volkova found his former colleagues. Those who were still alive were reluctant to recall the events of 30 years ago. But gradually, a picture of what had happened began to emerge. After the factory closed, Vitka changed, said pensioner Mikhail Tokarev, a former mechanic at the motor depot. He became nervous and skittish. He said we had to forget everything and start a new life. Tokarev remembered that fateful day. February 15th, Savelyev personally gave Morozov his assignment for his last trip. He insisted that the route was very important and that he must not be late. A week later, the bus was reported missing. The pensioner continued. Vitka organized a search, but it was half-hearted. It was as if he knew it was useless. The picture was becoming clearer. Savelyev was not the mastermind behind the crime, but merely its executor. Someone had forced him to send the bus on a different route. But who? Volkova found the answer in the KGB archives. It was not easy to gain access to the secret documents, but her connections in the prosecutor's office helped. The case had the code name, Operation Clean Hands. The plan was thought out down to the smallest detail. A group of unreliable factory workers had to be neutralized before they could hand over compromising materials to the law enforcement agencies. The perpetrators of the operation were referred to in the documents only by code names. Wolf, Bear, Fox were the names given to the operatives who were supposed to intercept the bus in the forest. But one document contained a real surname. The operation was supervised by Lieutenant Colonel Igor Drozdov of the State Security Service. In 1991, he was 32 years old. Volkova felt a rush of adrenaline. Finally, she had a concrete lead. All that remained was to find Drozdov and find out if he was still alive. The search took a week. Igor Drozdov did not disappear after the collapse of the KGB. On the contrary, he had a brilliant career in the new structures. He was now deputy head of the regional FSB department. Volkova understood that a direct summons for questioning could scare off a high-ranking official. A more subtle approach was needed. She decided to start with his entourage. The former lieutenant colonel lived in an elite neighborhood in the regional center. His neighbors described him as a quiet, withdrawn man. He had no family or friends. His work was his whole life. But one detail caught the investigators' attention. Every February 15th, Drozdov took the day off and left town. Neighbors saw him return late at night with a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of vodka. It was as if he was marking some sad date or commemorating someone. Volkova decided to follow him on the next anniversary of the tragedy. On February 15, 2022, she was on duty near Drozdov's house from early morning. At 8:30, he came out of the building and got into a black foreign car. Volkova followed him at a distance, trying not to attract attention. Drozdov drove confidently, clearly knowing the way. An hour later, he stopped near a small cemetery in the suburbs. He took flowers from the car and headed for one of the graves. Volkova waited until he had walked away, then approached. The modest monument bore the inscription, Morozov Alexei Nikolaevich, Wayne 57, 1991. An honest man and a good father. Drozdov stood in front of the grave, holding the unopened bouquet in his hands. Tears slowly rolled down his face. He whispered something, but Volkova couldn't make out the words. Then he took a flask out of his pocket, poured vodka into 2 glasses, and placed one on the gravestone. He drank the second one in one gulp. And again he spoke to the deceased driver as if he were an old friend. Volkova realized that she was not standing before a heartless killer, but a man who had been tormented by remorse for 30 years. Perhaps he would become an ally in her search for the truth. She waited for Drozdov to return to his car and approached him. Igor Vladimirovich, she called out. My name is Anna Volkova. I'm a prosecutor. I need to talk to you about bust number 47. Drozdov froze, not turning around. His shoulders slumped as if he had been waiting for this moment for years. So they found it, he said quietly. And I kept wondering when it would happen. Tell me what happened on February 15th, 1991, Volkov asked. It's time to close this chapter. Drozdov slowly turned around. His face showed fatigue and a willingness to tell the truth. But who had ordered him to kill 12 innocent people 30 years ago? Part 2. Confession. Drozdov ran his hand over his face and sighed heavily. He had been waiting for this conversation for 30 years. For 30 years, every night he had seen the faces of the 12 people he had sent to their deaths. Let's go to my place, he said. We'll talk there. This isn't the place for such confessions. Volkova got into her car and followed him. Drozdov's home turned out to be a modest 2-room apartment in a prefabricated high-rise building. There was no luxury, only the bare necessities and a bookcase. "Would you like some tea?" asked the host, but he was already taking out a bottle of cognac. "We need something stronger for this conversation." He poured 2 glasses and sat down opposite the investigator. His hands were shaking. In 30 years of service, he had seen a lot. But his own crimes tormented him more than any nightmare. "I'll start from the beginning," said Drozdov. "February 1991. The country is falling apart. The party is losing power. But there are people who don't want to lose their positions and money." He took a sip of cognac and continued. The story he told was one of betrayal and greed at the highest levels. In the late 1980s, a group of high-ranking party officials created a shadow scheme to embezzle funds intended for the disposal of radioactive waste from military factories. The money was huge, Drozdov explained. Millions of rubles every year. Officially, it was spent on safe waste disposal. In reality, the radioactive waste was simply buried in the forest. The difference between official expenditures and actual costs ended up in the pockets of the scheme's organizers. Over 5 years, they stole an amount equal to the budget of an entire district. But by February 1991, the scheme began to unravel. A group of engineers from the Severnaya Zvezda plant discovered violations and began to gather evidence. They found the sites of illegal burials, Drozdov said. They measured the radiation levels and took photographs. They had irrefutable evidence. Volkova listened attentively, taking notes. The picture was becoming clearer. 12 people on bus number 47 were about to expose a criminal scheme and put dozens of high-ranking officials behind bars. "Who gave the order to eliminate them?" asked the investigator. Drozdov paused, gathering his courage. To name the person who ordered the killings would be to admit his own guilt in the murder of innocent people. "Arkady Zotov," he finally said. "First secretary of the regional party committee. He ran the whole scheme from the beginning." Volkova wrote down the name. Zotov was a major figure in regional politics in the late 1980s. After the collapse of the USSR, he disappeared from public view. "Where is he now?" she asked. "He died 10 years ago," Drozdov replied bitterly. "Liver cancer. They say it was from vodka. But I think it was from radiation. He often visited waste disposal sites." So the main instigator had escaped justice. But Volkova had no intention of stopping there. Dozens of people were involved in the scheme, and many of them could still be alive. "Tell me how it happened," she asked. "In detail, every detail." Drozdov closed his eyes, immersing himself in memories. February 14th, 1991. A call to Zotov at the Regional Party Committee, an urgent assignment of special importance. Zotov was in a panic, Drozdov recalled. He had received information that tomorrow morning a group of engineers would be going to the regional prosecutor's office. They were taking all the evidence of our violations with them. The plan was devised overnight. The bus with the engineers was to break down in a remote forest. The passengers would die of hypothermia. The documents would be confiscated and destroyed. But we didn't plan to kill them, Drozdov justified himself. According to the plan, they were supposed to just freeze to death. An accident, a tragic accident. Volkova felt disgust. This man was still trying to convince himself that he wasn't a murderer, as if the method of murder mattered. "What went wrong?" she asked. Drozdov poured himself more cognac. His hand was shaking more than before. Memories of that day had tormented him every night for 30 years. On the morning of February 15th, he drove to the site of the alleged breakdown with 2 operatives. The plan seemed simple. Stop the bus, get the passengers off under the pretext of checking their documents, and seize the compromising materials. Morozov behaved unexpectedly. Drozdov continued. He saw us and realized it was a trap. He blocked the bus doors from the inside. The passengers refused to get out. They demanded explanations and threatened to complain to higher authorities. The situation was getting out of control. We had a cylinder of carbon monoxide with us, Drozdov admitted, in case we needed to knock them out to seize the documents. But Petrov, one of my men, went too far. An operative named Petrov decided to act quickly and harshly. He connected the cylinder to the bus's ventilation system and opened the valve to full power. I yelled at him to stop, Drozdov said with pain in his voice. But it was too late. 10 minutes later, all the passengers were dead. Volkova presented this scene. 12 people slowly falling asleep in the bus. Driver Morozov recording his last words on a tape recorder. The horror of the last minutes of life. "Where is Petrov now?" she asked. "He died 5 years ago," Drozdov replied. "Cirrhosis of the liver. He drank heavily after that operation. He couldn't forget what he had done." Another perpetrator had escaped punishment, but Volkova did not lose hope of finding other participants in the crime. "Who else knew about the operation?" she insisted. Drozdov named several people. Zotov's deputy at the Regional Party Committee, Kravtsov, the head of the KGB department, Semenov, the director of the Severnaya Zvezda factory, Makarov. They all got a share of the stolen money, he explained. The scheme only worked because of their cover and silence. Volkova wrote down every name. Tomorrow she would start looking for them. Some of these people must still be alive and must answer for what they did. "And what happened after that?" she asked. "After you killed the passengers," Drozdov finished his cognac and leaned back heavily in his chair. The hardest part was yet to come. Telling her how they had covered up the crime. "We took the bus deep into the forest," he confessed. "We knew a place where no one would find it, or so we thought." The documents that the engineers were carrying were confiscated and burned. The bus was officially declared missing in a snowstorm. A search was conducted for show and quickly called off. Savaliev from the motor depot helped us, added Drozdov. He signed all the necessary documents and confirmed the blizzard story. He was well paid for it. Volkova remembered the frightened old man in the nursing home. Now it was clear why the mention of bus number 47 had caused him to have a heart attack. "Did the families of the victims suspect anything?" asked the investigator. "Some asked questions," replied Drozdov, but they were quickly persuaded not to seek the truth. They were threatened with dismissal and problems with their children. In 1991, people were afraid to get involved with the authorities. Gradually, the topic of the missing bus became taboo. The relatives of the victims received small compensation payments and fell silent. Life went on as if nothing had happened. "And you? How have you lived with this all these years?" Volkov asked. Drozdov smiled bitterly. 30 years of torment, sleepless nights, alcohol. His family fell apart. His wife couldn't stand his constant oppression. His children distanced themselves, considering their father a failure. "Every year on the anniversary of the tragedy, I visit Morozov's grave," he confessed. "I ask him for forgiveness. I know I won't get it, but I ask anyway." Volkova looked at her watch. The conversation had lasted 3 hours. Drozdov had told her almost everything, but some important details remained. "Where is the radioactive waste buried?" she asked. "The very waste that started it all?" 20 kilometers from where the bus was found, Drozdov replied. "Near Lake Glukhoy, The radiation levels are still high there. Volkova wrote down the coordinates. An environmental crime committed 30 years ago continued to poison nature. It was necessary to organize an inspection and clean up the area. Are you ready to officially confess to what you did? She asked the main question. Drozdov was silent for a long time. A confession meant the end of his career, criminal prosecution, and prison. At his age, it was practically a death sentence. Yes, he finally said. I've been a coward for 30 years. It's time to take responsibility for my actions. The next day, Volkova began searching for the other participants in the criminal scheme. She found Kravtsov in a private clinic. The old man was battling cancer. Semenov had died of a heart attack in the 2000s. But the plant director, Makarov, was alive. Moreover, he was thriving. After the closure of Severnaya Zvezda, he had built a successful construction business and become one of the richest men in the region. Finding him was not difficult. The 75-year-old Makarov lived in a luxurious mansion outside the city. Officially, he had long been retired, but in fact he controlled several large companies. Volkova arrived at his home unannounced. Security guards let the investigator in after checking her documents. Makarov received her in his office, which was furnished with expensive furniture. "How can I help law enforcement?" he asked politely. "Tell me about bus number 47, Volkova said bluntly. Makarov's reaction was completely different from that of Saveliev or Drozdov. He wasn't scared or speechless. On the contrary, something like satisfaction flashed in his eyes. "Finally," he said with a smirk. "I thought I would take this secret to my grave." Volkova was alarmed. Such a reaction was unexpected. Makarov was not behaving like a criminal who had been exposed, but like a man who had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "Are you ready to testify?" she asked. "More than ready," Makarov replied. "But first, let me tell you something interesting." He got up from the table and walked over to the safe. He turned the combination, opened the door, and took out a thick folder of documents. "I've been collecting evidence for 30 years, he explained, returning to his seat. "Every document, every receipt, every recording of telephone conversations." Volkova took the folder and began to look through its contents. What she saw exceeded all expectations. A detailed scheme of the thefts, the names of all the participants, the amounts of money stolen. "Why did you do this?" she asked in amazement. Makarov smiled bitterly. His story turned out to be more complicated than the investigator had imagined. "Because I was not a willing participant in this scheme," he explained. "I was forced to keep quiet by threats. In February 1991, Makarov did indeed know about the group of engineers' plans to hand over the documents to the prosecutor's office. But he did not inform Zotov about this. On the contrary, I tried to talk them out of it," said the director. "I understood that it was dangerous. But they didn't listen. After the bus passengers were murdered, Zotov summoned Makarov to his office. He explained what had happened and demanded his silence. As a guarantee, he threatened to kill the director's family. "I had a little daughter," Makarov said with pain in his voice. Zotov said directly, "If anything happens, she will be next." Makarov lived with this secret for 30 years, but all this time, he gathered evidence against the real organizers of the crime. He hoped that justice would be restored someday. "There are recordings of Zotov's conversations in the folder," he said. "I secretly recorded our meetings. There is his direct confession to organizing the murder." Volkova felt a rush of excitement. Finally, there was irrefutable evidence. The case could be brought to court. "Why didn't you go to the police earlier?" she asked. "To whom?" Makarov replied. In the 1990s and 2000s, many of those involved in the scheme held high positions. They would have simply destroyed me and my family. Only now, when the main figures had died or lost their influence, did he decide to tell the truth. Volkova studied the documents late into the night. The scale of the embezzlement was enormous. Over 5 years, the criminals stole funds equivalent to several billion rubles today. But the most valuable piece of evidence turned out to be an audio recording of a conversation between Zotov and Drozdov on February 16, 1991. The voice of the first secretary of the regional committee could be clearly heard on the tape. "The operation was a success. There are no more witnesses. The documents have been destroyed. Everyone will forget about the bus in a month." This was direct evidence confirming the organization of the murder of 12 people. The next day, Volkova officially questioned Drozdov. In the presence of a lawyer, he confirmed all his statements and admitted his guilt in the murder of the passengers of bus number 47. Makarov also gave detailed testimony and handed over all the evidence he had collected to the investigation. Records, documents, and financial reports were added to the case file. Gradually, a complete picture of the crime emerged. A group of party officials led by Zotov had created a scheme to embezzle state funds. When they were threatened with exposure, they resorted to murder. Drozdov was arrested and placed under house arrest, taking into account his age and state of health. Makarov was recognized as a witness, not a defendant. It was proven that he had been coerced into silence. Volkova felt satisfied with the work she had done. Justice had prevailed, albeit 30 years late. The families of the victims would finally learn the truth about the fate of their loved ones. But one question continued to torment her. Why did Zotov decide on such an extreme solution? Was it really worth killing 12 people just for money? She found the answer to this question while studying the personal file of the first secretary of the regional committee. The party archives contained documents that shed light on the true motives behind the crime. But that was another story. Part 3. The Price of Silence. The party committee archives kept their secrets in the basement of an old building. Volkova descended the creaky steps, holding the permission to study Arkady Zotov's personal file. The folder was thicker than expected. Character references, reports, party disciplinary measures. But the most interesting information was hidden in the medical reports attached to the documents. In December 1991, Zotov was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. The doctors gave him no more than 6 months to live. The first secretary of the regional committee knew he was dying. Volkova reread the report twice. Now everything became clear. Zotov wasn't just protecting a corruption scheme, he was securing his family's future. The archive also contained financial documents. Over 5 years of embezzlement, a huge sum had accumulated in Zotov's personal accounts. The money was transferred to his wife and children shortly before his death. He knew he was going to die soon, the investigator mused. And he was willing to do anything to keep what he had stolen for his family. 12 human lives versus the financial well-being of his family. For the dying party official, the choice was simple. But the story had a sequel. Volkova found Zotov's correspondence with his wife in the archives. The letters were dated March 1992, a month before his death. "Dear Tamara," he wrote, "if anything happens to me, remember, all the money was earned honestly. Don't listen to anyone. Don't trust anyone. Our children must live with dignity. Zotov took the truth to his grave. His family lived on blood money for 30 years, unaware of its origin or pretending not to know. Volkova decided to find the first secretary's widow. Tamara Zotova was still alive, an 83-year-old woman living in an upscale neighborhood of the capital. The meeting took place in a luxurious apartment furnished with antique furniture. Tamara Mikhailovna looked well-groomed and calm. 30 years of comfortable life had not been in vain. "What would you like to talk about?" she asked, pouring tea from an expensive set. "About your husband," replied Volkova, "and about the money he left you." The old woman's face changed. The mask of well-being slipped away, revealing fear and understanding. She knew. All these years she had known the truth. Arkady was an honest party worker, Tamara said in a trembling voice. "He never hurt anyone." "He killed 12 people," Volkova said harshly, "and you know it." There was silence for several minutes. Tamara sat staring into her cup of tea. Her hands were shaking with emotion. "He told me before he died," she finally admitted. "He said he had to do terrible things for our future." On his deathbed, Zotov confessed to his wife that he had organized the murders. He explained that the money had been obtained dishonestly, but asked her to keep quiet for the sake of the children. "I wanted to return everything to the treasury," Tamara continued. "But Arkady said that if I did, I would ruin my own children." It was a cruel dilemma. Telling the truth meant destroying the lives of her son and daughter. Keeping quiet meant being an accomplice to a crime. "What did you choose?" asked Volkova, although the answer was obvious. "Silence," whispered the old woman. "I chose silence, and I regret it every day." For 30 years, Tamara was tormented by remorse. She spent her husband's money on charity, thinking that it would atone for his sins. But it was impossible to escape the truth. "Are you ready to testify?" asked the investigator. "Yes," Tamara replied firmly. "It's time to end this story." The next day, Volkova received the long-awaited call. The examination of the remains from the bus had been completed. The results confirmed the cause of death: carbon monoxide poisoning. But the most important discovery awaited her elsewhere. A group of ecologists surveyed the area around Lake Glukoye using the coordinates provided by Drozdov. The radiation level was dozens of times higher than normal. Buried containers of radioactive waste were found in the soil. An environmental crime committed 30 years ago continued to poison nature. "The area will need to be completely cleaned up," said the expedition leader. "The work will take several years and cost millions of rubles." Volkova understood that the scale of the crime was much greater than it had initially appeared. Zotov and his accomplices had not simply stolen money and killed people. They had condemned future generations to suffering. The case was sent to court. Drozdov appeared before the judges as the only surviving organizer of the murder. Makarova was recognized as a witness for the prosecution. The trial lasted 3 months. The courtroom was packed with relatives of the victims, journalists, and activists. 30 years of waiting for the truth were coming to an end. Drozdov behaved with dignity. He did not try to justify himself or shift the blame onto the dead. He described each stage of the crime in detail and named all those involved. "I am guilty of the deaths of 12 innocent people," he said in his final statement. "I ask no one for leniency. I deserve the most severe punishment." Makarov's testimony made a strong impression on the jury. The secret recordings of Zotov's conversations left no doubt about his guilt. Everyone was particularly shocked by the testimony of Tamara Zotova. The 83-year-old woman struggled to reach the podium, but spoke firmly and clearly. "My husband was a murderer," she said. "I lived on blood money for 30 years, and I am ashamed of it. I ask for forgiveness from the families of the victims." Silence fell in the courtroom. Many people cried as they listened to the confession of the widow of the main organizer of the crime. The trial ended in late October. Drozdova was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Considering her age and health, the sentence was suspended. But the main thing was not the sentence. The main thing was that the truth had finally come out. The families of the victims received official apologies from the state and substantial compensation. The money was recovered from Zotov's property, which had belonged to his family all these years. Tamara Zotova voluntarily handed over all her husband's real estate to the state. The first secretary's son and daughter initially protested, but then accepted their mother's decision. "This money is cursed," Tamara explained to them. "It is better to live honestly and poor than rich and in sin." Volkova personally met with the relatives of each of the 12 victims. These conversations were the most difficult part of the investigation. The daughter of engineer Belov, Lyudmila Konstantinovna, waited 30 years for news about her father. When she learned the truth, she was unable to recover for several days. "I always felt that something had happened to him," she said through tears. "But I didn't think he had been killed." Belov had planned to hand over evidence of environmental crimes at the plant to the prosecutor's office. He paid for this with his life, as did his colleagues. Osipova's son, Andrei Mikhailovich, became an environmental activist. He spent his entire life fighting for a clean environment, unaware that his mother had died for the same cause. "Now I understand where my passion for protecting the environment comes from," he reflected. "It must be in my blood." The family of accountant Kryukov was the largest. He was survived by his wife, 3 children, and 8 grandchildren. All of them attended the trial. "My grandfather was an honest man," said his eldest grandson. "He would be proud that the truth has finally prevailed." Every meeting with the relatives of the victims left a mark on Volkova's soul. She saw the pain that the criminals had caused not only to the victims themselves, but also to their loved ones. 30 years of uncertainty, hope, and disappointment. 30 years of unanswered questions. And finally, the bitter truth that put everything in its place. A memorial was erected at the site where the bus was found. It was a simple black granite stele with the names of the 12 victims. The inscription read, "They died for the truth." Volkova arrived at the opening of the memorial. All the relatives, former colleagues of the victims from the factory, and journalists gathered. Even Drozdov asked for permission to attend. He stood aside, leaning on a cane. 73 years, and the burden of his crime had made him a frail old man. When the memorial was unveiled, he knelt down and prayed for a long time. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive me if you can." The priest said a prayer for the dead. The names of all 12 victims were read aloud. Their relatives laid flowers at the monument and lit candles. Volkova stood nearby, thinking about the road she had traveled. 6 months of investigation, dozens of interrogations, thousands of documents. All for the sake of restoring justice. What now? She asked herself. What next? Next came the work of cleaning up the contaminated area. Environmentalists had already begun to remove radioactive waste to special storage facilities. The process would take years, but nature had to be saved. Next came the investigation of other crimes of that era. The scheme to steal funds for waste disposal was not limited to this region. Then came the memory. The memory of the people who died for the truth. The memory that silence is not always golden. Sometimes it becomes complicity in a crime. A month after the trial, Volkova received a letter from the daughter of Morozov's driver. Tatiana lived in St. Petersburg and worked as a teacher. "Thank you for not letting my father be forgotten," she wrote. "For 30 years, I thought he had simply abandoned us. Now I know he was a hero. Alexei Morozov really was a hero. In the last moments of his life, he didn't think about himself. He recorded everything that happened on a cassette tape so that the truth would one day come out. His recording became a key piece of evidence in solving the crime." The voice of the driver from 1991 helped bring the killers to justice 30 years later. Volkova often recalled Morozov's words, "If anyone finds this recording, remember, we are not to blame. We just wanted to tell the truth." The truth came out. It took a long time, but justice prevailed. Drozdov spent only 6 months in prison. Doctors diagnosed him with terminal liver cancer. He spent the last months of his life in a prison hospital. Before his death, he asked for a letter to be delivered to the families of those who had died. It contained just a few lines. "I apologize for what I have done. I know I don't deserve it, but I ask anyway." Volkova personally delivered the letter to the victims' relatives. The reactions varied. Some tore up the letter without reading it. Others wept over the words of remorse. "We forgave him," said the daughter of engineer Belov. "Not for him, but for ourselves, so that we don't carry hatred in our hearts." Forgiveness proved more important than revenge. The families of the victims wanted to move on with their lives, not remain stuck in the past. A year later, an environmental center was opened on the site of the former Severnaya Zvezda factory. Its mission is to monitor the state of the environment and prevent similar crimes. The center was named after the 12 heroes, as the victims of bus number 47 were now called. Their names were carved on a marble plaque at the entrance to the building. Volkova attended the opening of the center. The children and grandchildren of the victims took part in the ceremony. They turned the tragedy into a symbol of the struggle for a clean environment. "Our fathers and grandfathers did not die in vain," said the son of technologist Osipova. "Their sacrifice made society think about ecology." The crime committed 30 years ago became a lesson for future generations. A lesson that silence in the face of injustice can turn into tragedy. The investigator looked at the young faces of the ceremony participants and thought, "They will not repeat the mistakes of their ancestors. They will not remain silent." 2 years have passed since the bus was found in the forest. The case was officially closed, but its consequences continue to be felt. An environmental program to clean up contaminated areas received government funding. Similar inspections were carried out in other regions. Dozens of illegal radioactive waste burial sites were discovered. The same pattern was repeated everywhere. Officials saved money on disposal and pocketed the cash. Volkova was given a new assignment: to head a special team investigating environmental crimes of the past. There was enough work to keep her busy for years to come. How many more secrets do our forests hide? She wondered as she studied maps of the suspected burial sites. But those were other stories. The story of bus number 47 had come to an end. Truth had prevailed, the guilty had been punished, and the memory of the victims had been immortalized. Volkova visited the memorial to the victims for the last time on the anniversary of the tragedy. February 15th became the official day of remembrance for the region's environmental victims. Flowers were laid at the memorial not only by relatives of the victims, but also by ordinary citizens. School children read poems, and activists held environmental protests. The 12 people who died in the bus became a symbol of the struggle for truth and justice. Their deaths were not in vain if they forced society to change. Volkova laid white roses at the memorial and stood in silence. Her life's work was complete. Justice prevailed, albeit 30 years late. Crows circled in the sky above the forest, breaking the silence with their cawing. But for the investigator, this was not an ominous sign, but a symbol of life continuing. Life goes on, and sooner or later, the truth comes out. That was the main lesson of the story of bus number 47. Final question for reflection. What do you think? Should crimes of the past be revealed if it causes pain to living people? Where is the line between justice and humanity? Share your opinion in the comments.